do it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Can I touch you? All right. Welcome to the podcast. I am here with Matthew James Livingstone the first.
Yeah.
Usually the first doesn't use the first. That's kind of implied.
Yeah, sometimes you need to add some extra on the end.
So what's your son's name?
Theodore James.
So you didn't think to go the second with that one?
No, I wasn't allowed to have a junior.
Yeah, that's fair. Some things just don't need to be repeated.
Exactly.
So Matt, you're the sales director at Village. We've been friends, well, a long time, since you've been here for 10 years and we knew each other before that.
Yeah, it's been a few years. Too long.
Too long, way too long. So you've been in, I guess, what I'll broadly define as the hospitality industry for a long time. You started, and I don't know if you thought I was joking or not when I said this, but this is actually where I want to start. As a kid, you worked at McDonald's, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was there from 16 years old.
Yeah. And so the reason I'm actually really curious, when there's two jobs that people talk about that I am always curious about. One is when people say that they've worked at McDonald's, because I feel like I know a disproportionate number of people who have worked at McDonald's as young, like as kids, I'll say, who have went on to have like quite successful careers. And my wife being one of those. And I'm always curious. The second place that I hear mentioned a lot is Earl's.
Yeah.
And so what is it about, and what is it about McDonald's that creates that atmosphere that people do often use it as a platform for later success?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is the obviously the training structure and the processes that are put in place. They're very rigid in teaching you this style for consistency, and same thing with Earl's. When you go to an Earl's in Calgary or Edmonton, it's consistency. So it's the repetitiveness. It's building something in the exact same way every time. And I think that's why, the training structure there has been so well. The other big thing is when they do train, a lot of it is outside of McDonald's. It's not just, this is only usable here. It's going forward, you have this basis and these building blocks to learn a lot more than just, hey, put the mustard before the ketchup.
Mm-hmm. So how long were you there for then?
I was there 7 years in total. So I worked my way from, just a regular crew person all the way to the second assistant manager. And that's when I left to go back to school. Yeah.
I'm always curious, how do they motivate people at a place? Because you go into a McDonald's and it's busy. And you just think like my lazy brain is going, how did they get these kids to wake up at 6 a.m. to come in and do this? So what was kind of the magic behind how they motivated people to do that?
There was a lot of, staff incentives. There was also a lot of pressure on sales. You also had a team of the managers that were, usually pretty close to the crew, and they would, try and motivate them that way. You would have on the 6 a.m. crew, maybe the regular people every Saturday.
Right.
So they kind of became friends, and they didn't want to let the other one down.
Yeah.
But then there was still, the pressure sales, like you have to get a car through the drive-through in 60 seconds. And,
right.
You got to keep your record going. So it was a really big thing on the management side of just like pushing and even the labor that went on there was, by the hour, we got to make sure we're making this much sales, to keep this many staff on. So everything was kind of competition / motivation by a little bit of friendship, but with business in the background.
Yeah, I like that, the whole, the foundation of not letting your team down, right? I think that's a big motivator. How long were you there for?
7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So step 2 in the process that I've put together in my brain is you go into kind of, the hospitality world in terms of bar and restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So McDonald's is kind of like your introduction into this world. What was it about just the industry in a whole that attracted you to going into kind of bar, restaurant, or staying in that space?
Well, I think a lot of the, again, processes that we learned at McDonald's. You know, before I was 21, I was dealing with the P&L at the restaurant. I was dealing with the hiring, the orientations. So I'd been through all the different areas of the restaurant and realized I liked it, food cost, inventory. So it kind of fit me and what I like. You know, I'm kind of a guy that likes to do different things every day rather than the same day in and out. So, you know, the bar industry kind of resonated there. And I had a great opportunity to go and sling some beers.
So what was your first job outside of McDonald's in the industry?
Yeah, so Darby Arms, way down in South Calgary. It's the only actually bar I've ever worked for.
Well, and you do mention that kind of time in your life quite often. Is that, I don't know if that's necessarily when you peaked as a human being, but no, but
pretty close.
But what was it about that time that was special for you? What was it about that time in your life?
Honestly, you know, 23 years old, working in a bar, making great money in tips. Hopefully the CRA doesn't listen.
No, you're it's all above board. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Just, you know, a lot of good friends, traveling. You know, it was fun times, no responsibility really. So it was a great time. Good people to work with too. So
So one of those things, and you mentioned about McDonald's, but it's interesting when you're that young and you're given kind of that responsibility where you get to kind of look behind the curtain of how it's running, and you're looking at, you know, food costs, and you're conscious of that. I find that interesting that they would allow that for you at McDonald's at such a young age. But then did that kind of continue on? Is that kind of, I guess, part of the industry that you gravitated towards, was more of like the back, the behind the scenes, how things operate?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was on the side of, you know, the inventory and how things happen. You know, being young, learning all that stuff really kind of set me up for the rest of my career, being focused on, you know, does this make sense to do something? Are the sales there to be doing this? And so same with, you know, the bar, even whether it was how many people we have on and labor cost, or, you know, what products, you know, we're pouring and you know, the drink mix of every shot and all that kind of stuff. So I think it gave me a different understanding that I don't know that everyone always has, especially at that age.
Yeah. So you went from from the bar to, was your next move to an agency?
Yeah, Premier Brands.
Yeah. And so what made you decide to switch, you know, staying in hospitality, but switching to, I guess, the other side of the bar in a way, like to go into an agency and instead of working at a bar, now you're selling to bars kind of thing?
I think kind of the typical, you get kind of sick of the hours in the bar. So you kind of look for the chance to be doing something in the same realm, but, you know, better hours, or, you know, more Monday to Friday versus, you know, closing at 4 a.m., getting home, you know, not getting to sleep till, you know, 8 a.m. and then it just rolls into your next shift. So it was more about lifestyle change.
So I've seen a lot of people, and I'm sure you have too, who have, you know, worked on that side. They've made the transition to working for an agency or for a brewery or what have you, thinking that, you know, it looks easy. A lot of people make it look easy. What was your experience with that?
You know, there was a lot of training right from day one, going into selling beer. You think it's easy. You think that you just walk in, everybody wants your stuff.
Right.
And you think it's fun and you're having lunch every day and stuff like that. But it's no different than any other sales job. If you're not hitting your numbers, you're not going to have a job for very long. So, you know, you really got to be able to be self-motivating and push. And, you know, sometimes, especially when, you know, working for an agency, when I'm the only person in Calgary, you know, to actually get up and, you know, go push yourself to go make those calls and not shut down early and you know, be there. You know, that last call is almost the one always that is the most beneficial. Well,
and that's a good point, is the self-motivation, right? Because at that point, it's kind of like, no one's watching me. I can do whatever the hell I want.
This is before CRMs and all that stuff too,
right?
Right?
Totally.
I wrote it all on a piece of paper, you know, for each store. So,
but you have to have that personal accountability. did you find? I'm just curious with that because working for an agency, you're dealing with, and you guys had well-established brands,
Yep.
right? So when you're walking into a place and kind of everybody knows the brands you're doing, it makes life easier. So what made you, where was the thought process when you decided to make the jump from a well-established agency selling well-established brands to, really small brewery at the time? What made you want to make that transition?
You know, not all the brands were that well known. We did launch a few during that period, so it was a lot of pushing and getting these brands more well known. But to actually make the change over to Village, I honestly thought I was going to leave the industry, get into sales in another field. But know Tom and Craig and Petey for a long time. We go for beers, and one day Tom said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody," and I said, "I'm not really looking," and he's like, "Just sit down and talk to some people." So I sat down with a couple of the founders and had a little chat, and it worked out, and that was 10 years ago.
It's funny when someone who's 7 feet tall tells you to sit down and talk to someone. It's funny how you just sit down and talk to somebody.
Sometimes.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Right away, sir. I was saying to you before we started recording, as I look to make sure we are recording, when Tom, so, I'm good friends with Tom and a lot of the people with Village here, but when Tom first told me that they had hired you, one of the things that really struck me is I legitimately thought it was a really smart hire, and specifically because I knew you to be very analytical, where I knew Tom to be very anecdotal and relationship based. And there's nothing, I'm not saying that to slight him at all, because I think those relationships are so important when you're building a business. But I thought your skills as your analytical skills would certainly benefit the team. How do you balance those two things in terms of, as a sales, when you're in sales, how do you balance those two worlds? Because I do believe that it's not one or the other. I think you have to really focus on strong relationships, but you also have to have those analytics. So how do you personally balance those two things?
I think it started even at the agency with Premier Brands was, we really, we ran our own territories. We had a commission structure that was based on just our area. So it really pushed you to, go and focus on the areas that you could make the biggest difference in the shortest amount of time.
Right.
And so a lot of it came from that. Moving over to Village, there was the not letting the team down, having Pete and Tom beside me. And, you want to make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck with our time, right? There's only 3 of us selling to all of Alberta.
Yeah.
We got to make sure we get to those stores that mean the most to Village, also can have the most impact. And then there's obviously the personal relationships that come along with getting to know some of these, for some of them, lifelong friends.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the challenge, right? And I'm sure this challenge exists in other industries, but they're not just your customers, they're not just your clients. They become friends after it. But at the same time, that makes it more challenging because the numbers still have to play a role in that. So it's like, yeah, you're my buddy, but you don't buy anything from me. You know what I mean?
You got to have those hard conversations sometimes. It's not worth my time to spend this much time here, or be dealing solely with you for an afternoon or whatever it is. So,
and I feel like you've always been able to kind of, your decisions are based on that a lot of times in a really unique way. One of the things that you said was, I'm gonna quote you on this, but it said work with what you love about working at Village. You said working with amazing people and for a company that believes in the same morals as myself. So I'm curious, what was your perception of what the moral foundation of Village was when you started, and kind of how does that align with how you live your life?
Obviously knowing Tom and Jim before I even started at Village. You really got a sense of community here. They've always taken care of, the staff really well. And so I think the alignment there is being good to people.
Yeah.
It's not just about making the dollar. It's about actually going out and doing good in the community and supporting, people in whatever they're going through or any event you can kind of, help out at. And even just the charity aspect of, Village from day one has been a huge thing.
I think there was always, my sense, knowing Jim, and like I knew Tom longer than I knew Tom before I met Jim, but I think there was always just a foundation of authenticity with that too. Like it wasn't let's help charity as a marketing spin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like it was foundational to the core where, as an investor, if I was to have been an investor, I would have been like, this is to the detriment of making money. You know what I mean? And actually you and I had an interesting conversation a while back where, they had this unique way of creating something that was very community based, very much giving back to the community, but also foundationally a business. Like they weren't like there as so that's a unique kind of combination that they were able to achieve.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, even my McDonald's days, right? If the numbers don't make sense, you don't do it.
Yeah.
And, from day one, Village has been looked at that, with profitability on certain SKUs, whether or not a product gets launched, when it gets launched, based on everything that could influence it from taxation to, time of year.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a good foundational core there of actual business values.
Yeah.
And then you have the overlay of the community and still giving 10% back of the bottom line to the community, which has been kind of a day one thing for us. So
yeah, which is amazing. So I have some kind of future looking questions, but I just kind of want to look back for a second, because I don't know that it's always obvious, and maybe you just never think about this yourself. But when you think about your position now as sales director with Village, do you consciously reference things that your experience, like, and again without belaboring it, going back to your McDonald's days, going back to being a bartender, agency, like are those experiences that you reference often? Like, do you know what I mean? Is that kind of what has, like, how much do you attribute all of those experiences to your current success, I guess?
I think they play in kind of the actual fundamental of kind of my work ethic, and what I've been pushing for kind of my whole career is you gotta try hard in everything you're doing. You gotta really push. Picking up new skill sets. I try and make sure I'm always learning, and creating those processes is still a big fundamental thing for me. And the consistency, whether it be in the beer quality or even the consistency of when you say you're going to call on somebody once a month, that you're there once a month.
Yeah.
That these things add up, and you got to continue to the over deliver on some of those for every customer.
Right. I like that. So you've been here for 10 years. You knew Tom, you knew Jim, you knew a lot of the founders, well before you started here. So you knew what you were getting into. One of the things that I'm always curious about is when you work with a company and, they have the core principles and they have an established kind of reputation and brand. Obviously Jim passed away. Tom isn't here on a day-to-day basis. How do you guys manage those things in terms of keeping that spirit alive, but you have to evolve at the same time. And I think they would be the first people to acknowledge that, right? Like, you can't just be like, no, this is what we decided, then, and this is. So yes, there's a core principle, there's a core foundation, but as a brand and as a company, you'd need to evolve. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, we do have our kind of core principles we look at as a company still to this day. They're always evolving. Situations change, circumstances, market changes. But to the core, we're community. We always want to make cool, innovative products that represent, everyone and not certain demographics or
right.
So we're always trying to evolve and change and keep pushing to the next level.
Is it important to maintain? Like, could there be a day? And this is just kind of, when you just say, yeah, that stuff's just outdated. Like, that was cool. That worked 20 years ago, man, but it doesn't work anymore. Like, because that must be a challenge. You know what I mean? I would say more so for Village than for other brands, is like to really stay true to, like, like you even said, the 10% back to the community. Someone at some point has to have said, really, do we need to do this still? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's just certain things where you're just revisiting, but it's just like, okay, this is our foundation, but we evolve.
Yeah, I think you can evolve on some of your foundational stuff. When it comes to actual brands, there are some that you're like, well, is this still what we need to be, producing and stuff? But then we go through a situation with, Blacksmith and Wit winning best in the world for their style.
Yeah.
Beers that we've been making for the last 11 years.
Yeah.
Right? Or 12 years. So sometimes we don't always know what's best either, right? We try and look at the market. We try and see, what styles we should be brewing.
Yeah.
But we do still have those, those classics that we continue to produce, and they still make up a big number for us.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. I was writing the word awards down as you were saying that, because I was thinking about it. It's like, sometimes people just think, you have to constantly be changing. But sometimes, almost those things prove you wrong. You know what I mean? It's like, son of a bitch, did we really have to win awards on two of our oldest beers? You know what I mean? As opposed to, like, and don't get me wrong, you guys have won awards on your newer beers, but that's kind of a validation in a way. It's just like, these are two of our oldest recipes, and we're still winning awards on these things. And I'm curious what your thought is on that. And then also too, maybe just talk about the awards themselves, because those were significant.
Yeah. So I think one of the coolest things that came out of those awards is, yes, we've been brewing those for so long. We've had whole new brew teams since day one, right? But we're still kind of to the McDonald's, keeping that consistency to the recipe. We're continue to, sometimes there might be some tweaks that are needed, but we still core to that recipe that we're still brewing from when we started. So, the brewers do an amazing job, and especially, having the same product day in and day out means a lot to our customers. Whether it's you go into a bar and Blacksmith tastes the exact same as it did last week, that's something that we have to always maintain. Because without that, if somebody doesn't have the consistency, they try it once, they might not have it again. So by having that high level of consistency and also quality is what we really kind of is a backbone for our brewing.
So one of the things when I think about, and this is not just in the brewing world, I guess this is in every facet of life, but there's a lot of challenges in the brewing world. And there's, people on social media that like to highlight those, and they certainly need to be addressed. One of the things that I really want to, talk about and make sure that people are focused on in their own personal lives is, work-life balance. And I know that to some degree, work-life balance is a myth. Like, you'll never be 50-50, right? Sometimes work is 90 and your family life is 10. But then hopefully other times it can be the opposite way, right? One of the things that I've seen is that, Jim was a really good example of, building a really strong business, but also having a really strong family life. Tom's been a good example of that too. And I would consider that you're a good example of that. So how do you do that? Because yes, there's challenges, but what you guys show by doing that is that it's possible, right? So how do you focus on that balance of work and after work life?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's always enough events to go to and things to be at. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's just actually finding, what are top priorities in there, and
Yeah.
is somebody else going to be able to make it instead of yourself, to make sure there's still somebody representing the brand there. And there's also the times where you are up late working, because the kids are, you have to have dinner and put them down, and then you're back at the computer. But that's not every day. And we try and really strive to make sure that, we get most of our work done during work hours,
Yeah.
to keep that balance. But, there's the times where it deviates outside of, and you roll with it. I think, again, back to kind of work ethic is, it's got to get done. So you can sit back and not do it, but somebody might do it, and you're that much farther behind.
Yeah, totally.
So if you don't do it, somebody else might, and then you're playing from behind.
So, and when you say someone else, not someone else within Village,
No.
someone else. Yeah. Does it help having a wife that's also been in the industry, so she gets the curveballs that come your way?
For sure, I think she's more understanding than most about my time and even events and having a beer at a bar isn't just me hanging out with friends.
Yeah.
All the time.
Sometimes
But
it is.
no, she's incredibly understanding in that way, and coming from the industry and her knowledge and her dealing with reps herself, she understands what it means. Those actually supporting a restaurant or bar by being there, having a pint, not just walking and saying hi and walking out.
Yeah.
So
100%. So I'm curious. You mentioned that 10 years ago you were thinking, okay, I'm gonna maybe do a career change, and Tom went like this and said, sit down and listen to this person and talk to this person. But what is it about the industry that has compelled you to stay? Because that was over 10 years ago that would have happened. So what is it that kind of keeps you in this world?
Honestly, like, so much of it is the people, and not just at Village. It's the people, the customers, the other reps. Even we see them around enough, and there's just it's a cool group.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
But we're getting paid to do this somehow sometimes.
Yeah.
But sometimes you got to buckle down and work late again.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing is that altogether this, especially Alberta craft brewing, it's a fun industry, and there's a lot of awesome people in it. So it's just kind of experiencing all that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'm always curious, because you're getting old, okay?
Yeah.
Just so you know, but you have a perspective now, right? You've seen, the industry evolve. Like when you would have started bartending, there probably wasn't a huge, craft beer scene per se, right?
No, they're like, back then we had 3 Big Rock taps. It would be the craftiest we went. Maybe Okanagan Springs.
Yeah.
But Trad, Grasshopper, and Honey Brown would have been the most crafty we would have got.
Totally.
When I got into the import side, I didn't know a lot about beer at all. Even the difference between a lager and an ale.
Yeah.
So I credit Bruce at the time teaching me about all that. But that was right at the start of kind of imports becoming a bigger thing.
Yeah.
1410 had just kind of kicked off, and the World Beer Houses. So people were looking into those different styles. It wasn't, for really until Village came around that really opened that craft market up, in Calgary at least. And at that point, I think it was just a smooth transition, and to get out of the import side and start selling the craft beer. And
yeah, and there was a consistency. I always say, like, Olds College has to take a lot of credit for just the consistency of product that we started to see, right? Like at a certain point, craft beer was, nothing against home brewers that go on to bigger scale, but there was challenges that all of a sudden, people were really confident that the craft product they were getting was a lot more consistent, I feel like.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think there was also a lot of craft breweries that were helping each other out.
Yeah.
We used to let a lot of breweries do testing on their beer at our facility because
Yeah.
we wanted everyone to have a high level product so that hopefully this becomes a destination for craft beer. And at the time when there was a handful of craft breweries in town to now where there's probably over 100 or whatever the number is
Throughout the province kind of
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
So
Yeah, no, it is amazing, and there's the numbers, but there's also just the consistency that I think is important. Um, I'm curious. I remember talking to a friend of mine is a chef, and I read that book called Kitchen Confidential, Anthony Bourdain. I'm always like a decade late in like getting reading things that are cool, but. Talking with him about that book, he said, "Yeah, geez, if you did any of that shit now, like you can't do any of that. Like kitchens don't work like that."
yeah.
I'm curious, in your world, in your mind, like how has in the time that you've been in the industry, how has it evolved for you? Like what can you say is like in a positive way, how has it evolved where positive things are happening?
Um, Yeah, I think there's a lot of great things happening. Diversity in the brewing industry is getting better and better each day. It's not perfect, but
Yeah.
everyone's really pushing, and they know there's a problem, so they're actually trying their best to diversify the employees, but also the who's actually the customers.
Right.
So trying to engage more different communities. For us, obviously, beer styles is a big thing that's always evolving.
Yeah.
And the styles that were cool 10 years ago aren't cool anymore. So
Except for Wit and Blacksmith.
except
So
for Wit and
don't take
Blacksmith,
those
yeah,
off. Yeah.
Yeah, American wheat ales.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's always an evolution, but I think the most positive thing we've seen is the evolution of the diversity in the brewery.
Yeah.
We're seeing more women in the brewing industry, and it's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say when you look at the industry today? Just like what are some of the biggest challenges? I'll give you an example. I get asked a lot, and I never know the answer to this because I'm not a numbers guy or I'm not analytic like you. But they see the number of breweries, and they think, well, are we at saturation? It'd be crazy to start a brewery now. In that kind of lens, what's the biggest challenge? Like, I guess, are we at saturation, or is it just that people have to look at what type of brewery they would be opening if they were to choose to? Like, because how you probably think about sales now is probably different than it was 10 years ago, right? So just right now in today's world, what are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a saturation point per se, but what we will run into is brewing for certain communities, or when we look into places like Vancouver, where they kind of go to a very hyper local demographic. This community is this brewery,
Right.
So I think there's always going to be opportunity for that. It's the scalability and being able to turn it into thousands of hex a year, and to get to that point, there's going to be a lot of cost, right? If you want to open a brewery today and only service your local community and just run out of your tap room, awesome. You can make great money at that. That's a great business. It's the scalability to get it across Alberta. Are you getting into other provinces? That's when it starts adding up, and you have to have the right plans for that. You can't just overnight do it, and just go wild on it. But it takes time. It takes some money to get that going.
And some future thinking, because I feel like 10 years ago you might be able to start a brewery and then kind of figure that stuff as you went. I feel like now you might have to think, okay, are we going to be that hyper local neighborhood bar or brew pub, or are we going to be someone who is distributing across Canada? Like, you kind of have to have that thought process locked in at the beginning to some degree.
mean, some of it can be evolve, right?
Yeah.
If you're making a really cool product and it gets there, but it's the capital, right?
Yeah.
It's the, what are you doing for canning?
Yeah.
How like, so it's the equipment investment that is really going to kind of slow some of that down.
Yeah.
But it's attainable for anyone.
Yeah.
It's just how you want to get out there and do it and put a rep force in place and
Yeah, totally.
have a full accounting division, rather than doing the books yourself. So there's a lot of stuff, just like any business, to scale up to a level. So it's just kind of what you're comfortable with in your business. And
Yeah. So what are the trends? What is the next kind of 5 years look like in the industry, in your opinion? Like,
hopefully people start drinking more beer.
Yeah.
Obviously low alcohol has been a big trend. We got into the non-alc business about 5 years back. It's been a great business for us. But for some of those beers that I think people are a lot more conscious about driving.
Yeah.
So they want to have a low alc beer, they want to have a non-alc beer. It's not necessarily, I don't know. I think the next few years are going to be trying to get people back into beer. We're seeing the younger demographic isn't out drinking nearly as much as some of the others.
Yeah.
So it's trying to connect with them, which is, like you said, I'm kind of old. So engaging with this newer, younger crowd, how do we do that? How do we touch and get involved and do the cool, fun things that they want to do too? And is there a beverage that is right for that community? So it's more about just seeing how everything develops. But as far as a 5-year plan, I think, if we could get more beer sold, that'd be awesome.
I think that's interesting. And what would be because there's a little bit of, let's kind of be leaders and kind of show people what they should be consuming. But there's also this kind of like looking back and observing what people are consuming. And so I feel like you guys have kind of done I would say you've done a good job at, seeing where those trends are. You guys have a line of ciders. You have the non-alcs. So how important is that to, instead of just saying like, no, this is what our direction is, this is who we are. How do you, I guess, balance those two things, which is part of it has to be, this is our vision, this is what we're going to put out to the market. And then the other part being, let's sit back and watch what the market is telling us.
Yeah, so we do a lot of kind of research into those areas of what is happening in the market, what areas are trending, what is cost entry in those areas. Is there a big company that might be involved in that area already that could really buy out all your space anyways? So it's knowing where to play. A lot of it comes back to our core values again of creativity and innovation too. So we're always testing new things with our brewers, our staff, whether it comes to brew styles or different liquids that we're trying out. So we're always trying to stay on trend, or at least understand where the trends are going. But we might not always release a product at a certain period based on how the market is currently for that.
So what motivates you? Like you seem to be a guy who doesn't need, cheerleading. You're kind of always, going. I never feel like I have to be like, hey, Matt, you seem down today. Like you're always kind of, so where does that come from? What motivates you on a daily basis?
I think it's just kind of a love for the kind of job, the industry, the people. I've always been somebody who, kind of gets energy from other people, interaction. That's why I think I did pretty well as a bartender. You're always talking and learning and stuff like that. So I think that's what kind of gets me going. It's not same day in, day out. We are always looking at different ways to look at things or ideas or focuses. So it's not that constant grind, and monotony. So
I love it. No, it's been fun. Like I said, I've known, the people Village for a long time, and you independently before. So when you joined with these guys, and like it's crazy to think that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I love being a part of I would say I'm adjacent to the beer industry. I get to just watch what you guys do and enjoy the fruits of your labor. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of sit down and learn about what the hell makes Matt tick. Matthew James Livingstone the first
Yes.
tick.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story, man.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
Cheers.